Hello, everyone. This is your host, Manoj Tandon. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security, Security Confidential. And we are going to have an amazing conversation today. We are very fortunate to have Matt Brown on the show. Matt is the host of The Matt Brown Show. He's a serial entrepreneur. You've probably seen him on television in various places. He's the author of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, Your Inner Game. So, Matt, honored to have you. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Manoj. Great to be here.
So, Matt, give us a little bit about your background. Our audience loves origin stories. So give us like a 5-minute snippet here. Like what's your beginning?
So obviously, you can hear I'm not from America. I don't hail from America. Actually, my origin story started in South Africa, and I've now moved to the States. But basically, in my early years, I kind of had two passions in life. One was music, and the other one was business. And I moved to London when I was 19, started my first company, and it was a record label, of course,
Okay.
right? So I married the two passions. And basically, it was the time when the internet had sex and Napster was around, and everyone was downloading Metallica's music, and Lars was losing his mind on national television and all this kind of stuff. But what was really happening was that the music industry was changing, was being disrupted thanks to the internet. And so the whole business model of music changed like literally overnight. And so I basically took advantage of that. And what we were doing was doing digital album releases as opposed to LPs or records, which were very expensive. I mean, you would have to spend, £500 just on one test pressing record.
Wow.
Whereas with the internet, now your cost of distribution when the cost of distribution was practically zero.
Sure.
So I created something called the Voodoo. The record label was called Voodoo Vinyl, and I created the Voodoo Vinyl Remix Network. And so basically, what we were preying on was this idea that if you were a musician, that you needed a record label to release your music. When actually now the whole paradigm had changed, you didn't really need one. And so what I was able to do was sign the master recording rights from creative artists around the world. For nothing, and on the promise that we would give this original music access to our remix network. And what they would do, it was essentially take your sounds and create new versions of your original song. And then what we would do is select the best records or the best remixes, and then we would release them. And so we were releasing like 120 digital albums a year. I was DJing in clubs and all sorts of things around Europe and Ibiza and so forth. And I was just living the dream. And and so but I kind of got tired of the whole music business and the whole thing. Just that there was something about it that didn't light me up, and so I sold that company when I was 26. And so if you sell a company when you're 26 years old, you think you can walk on water.
Yeah.
And luckily, the universe was going to fix all that for me, because my next business failed in a major way, and that was really when I started to become curious about, well, how did one business scale and exit, and how did one die? And so I've always been curious about, how do you build something of value to the world and scale it and remain passionate about that thing? And really, it was also kind of like a springboard into everything that I did afterwards. Because if you fast forward, a few years or 10 years, started the Matt Brown Show podcast, and that was all about just having conversations with business leaders to really help myself first and foremost understand, well, how did they become successful? What did they go through? What kind of suffering did they go through building this thing of value? And that's really where the show started to expand. I think within the first year, I had an audience in like 100 countries around the world. And I was very lucky to be in that position, because podcasting at that time wasn't a thing. It wasn't like it is now. Like today, there's 3 million podcasts. But when I started 10 years ago, there was especially in Africa, like no one even knew what it was.
Wow.
And so I was just a first mover on that. But really, off the back of the show, I transformed myself a lot. I mean, I'm an introvert. I don't really like people. I only
Really?
like
Never.
people I know and trust. You know what I mean? And so I transformed though in that process, and I started talking to influencers in business, but then, into 100 episodes, then into 200, into 300, done over 850 now. But then I became the influencer over all these years and through all these podcasts. And now I've written 3 best-selling books. I've got a massive network and an awesome media platform, and it's all built to really make a positive difference to entrepreneurs and business leaders around the world, right? Because that's really what influence is. It's about elevating others. And so the why behind the show was all about making a positive difference to the community of business leaders, investors, startup founders, CEOs, and doing it one conversation at a time, but fundamentally with information sharing at scale. That's really what it was all about. And I believe that's why the show became successful. And that's actually why I had my opportunity to move to the US, was all through my show. So that's kind of the origin story.
I want to equate that to unlocking the human potential, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you've probably you've heard it quite a bit. What is the secret to unlocking the human potential that you have learned from all these years of doing this and talking to these people?
Yeah. It's a great question. I often wondered, why I kept going with this platform thing, because I've wanted to quit so many times. And every time I phone my producer, who's been with me from day one, and he says to me, dude, just do another one. Just do one more, you know. And then I'm like, cool, I'll do it. And then I do one
Yeah,
more, and I'm like, wow, that was a great conversation. And then I'll carry on. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So it's the potential thing is an interesting one, and I think it's about being curious around how do you actually unlock what potential you have, you know,
right.
because I didn't see myself as an influencer when I started, but then today people call me an influencer, which is really weird to hear because I still don't see that as part of my identity. But yet this process of doing, one podcast at a time, taking one step and putting it in front of the other, has really been the process that has driven me to become who I am today, and in terms of my ability to influence people and things like this. And so I'll use an analogy. How do you move a mountain? If the mountain is your potential, how do you move it? So the answer is, will you move it by moving small stones? You know, and I think people don't, they don't reach their potential because they're not prepared to start moving small stones, or they look at the mountain and they go, "That's not possible. How am I supposed to climb or move that mountain? It's impossible. It's too. Look, I only have 2 hands and 2 legs. I'm only me. I can't do that thing. I can't move that
That
mountain.
sounds
I
like
can't."
that's self-limiting.
Yeah, dude. Like, and so so people short circuit their ability to reach their potential literally so early on. It's actually frightening because on iTunes there's like a graveyard of could have been shows. They did like 3 episodes or 12 episodes, and then they went, that's pretty hard. Why am I not getting 1 million downloads per episode? And so they start focusing on the mountain, like the wrong thing. Like, why am I not this massively successful Joe Rogan guy? And they start, focusing on the wrong things, like downloads, as an example. Or they focus on, well, how much work is it? It's too much work. I don't have the time to do a show. I have to source the guests, then I have to interview them, then I've got to post-produce the show, then I've got to release it on iTunes, then I've got to take the video content, repurpose that into shorts, then I've got to write post copy, and then I've got to publish all that stuff, and I have to keep doing that every single episode. And so then they quit. And then they go, just too hard. Moving that mountain, becoming a platform owner globally was too hard, right? And so they quit. And so there's 2 things here. So one is people aren't prepared to move the small stones, and then when they start moving the small stones, they start focusing on the wrong things, and then they decide to quit. So that's why people don't reach their potential, in my view. So it doesn't really matter, what you're trying to do, but people aren't prepared to actually suffer. It's a weird thing. It's like,
So do you think they know this though? And my reason for asking that is that you often hear the layperson say, I don't know, I want a Ferrari, or I don't, I want to quit my job and do my own thing. You hear these kinds of sentiments in ad hoc conversations all the time, right? But do they know that they are self-limiting themselves?
I think we do. I think deep down we do. I just think we like to be in a state of denial. So I'll give you so same idea, different context. So here's the thing that you know to be true. So when we started chatting, you were like, "Oh, I'm never doing another startup again." I was like, "Yes." So here's the thing: why do 99% of startups die? Like, why do you think that actually is?
I,
So when,
I
like,
got okay.
yeah, go for it, dude. Like, why do you think that is? What's your sort of reason to
I
believe
think
that?
it's going to be a combination of a couple reasons. I think one, people don't have the psychological strength to actually carry forward with the
Mm-hmm,
marathon that
mm-hmm,
it is. They are overtly focused on metrics that and not process. I mean, nobody can guarantee an outcome. The only thing you can really do is execute to a process. And if you plan the process right, the outcome is going to be the best as it possibly can be. So
mm-hmm.
I don't think people do that. I think I see a lot of let's, I hate to say it because it's going to be heresy, that it's goal setting and they're going after the goal and they say F the journey. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it sounds
Yeah,
like to me, I don't know. I mean, you tell me. I
yeah. So you're right. I mean, there's many reasons why startups fail, but I think the number one reason why a startup fails is because the founder quit.
Really.
Yeah, man. You listen. Here's the thing. I've spoken to guys who are billionaires who've built companies with billions of dollars, etc., etc. And in fact, the last series I did in my show was all about failure. Actually, it was called Secrets of Fail, and that was the second book that went out. And I interviewed 150 CEOs all about their biggest, darkest, traumatic failures in business, like losing businesses, missing the timing for an exit, spending millions of dollars on products that never saw the light of day, having to retrench, 2 rounds of layoffs and basically going from 250 staff to like 5 people because of like some, systemic event. And so whatever these massive failures were, what they've always been able to do is persevere and transform that failure or that breakdown into a breakthrough. That's what they've been able to do. That's what makes the difference, to your point. And that's why I say, if you persevere, success can happen at any moment. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do. If you're a cybersecurity professional and you're like an infrastructure, specialist or whatever the case is, or maybe you're the founder and CEO of a cybersecurity company. Like if you persevere in whatever it is that you're trying to do, you will eventually get there. The problem is that people don't like change. In other words, like if we loved change, we'd all have 6 packs, but we don't. And so we don't want to actually do the work, do we? We fall into this like comfort zone. It's like, well, I don't want to shake the tree too hard because something might fall out of that tree that I
Right.
won't like, you know? And so this is why I say startups die because founders quit first and foremost, because the ones that do scale and do list on, list on the stock exchange or NASDAQ or whatever, or they have an IPO is because they persevered. They chose to suffer. The capacity to suffer is really what it comes down to, because you can solve any business problem. You don't have cash, take a loan. Oh, you've now got product market fit and you want to scale. Well, what do you need? Capital. Okay. You're sitting in America, right? You're sitting in Silicon Valley. You have access to more dry powder today than in ever, and than in ever, like in history. There's more capital available for startups to get access to. You know what I mean? And so, and then you scale, and then you hire the wrong CTO, and he steals money out of your bank account, and now suddenly, you know what I mean? Like you got another problem. Or maybe you build the wrong product and you put $1 million into marketing, and you basically lost $1 million, and because you got 3 new customers at $99 a month. You know what I'm saying? Like we all have to persevere through all this shit. It doesn't matter what you are trying to do. You know what I mean? Oh, suddenly you're stressed and you start drinking and taking drugs and alcohol just to cope, and now you're an addict, right? So then what do you need to do? Well, you need to fix your shit so you can focus on your family and your business. We all have these things that we go through every single day, but like I remember my first business, the second one that failed,
Yeah.
just after I had that exit. I remember feeling really sorry for myself, and I sat to my girlfriend at the time. I said to her, "Oh, woe is me, I'm a failure," you know. And she said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" So at the time, I was like, I quit. And it took me a long time later. I was having a chat to a mentor of mine, and he owns
Yeah.
hundreds of businesses. And he was telling me the story about his first business that failed. So he went to an investor and he took like, $1 million or whatever, and he put this, capital into his business, and his business eventually died. And he sat down with the investor and over a table over coffee, and he said, "Listen, I'm really, really sorry, Jonathan, but whatever it takes, I will pay you back every cent. No matter how long it takes, I promise you, I'll pay you back every cent." And then he got up from the table to leave. And the investor slammed his hand down on the table and he said, "Sit down." And so he's like, "Holy shit." So he sits down and he said, this investor said to him, "Did I back you or did I back the business?" So he said, "No, you backed me." So he said, "Yes." They said, "Businesses die. But if you walk out of that door, that's the only time that you fail." And so even today, he owns like hundreds of businesses because he chose to persevere. Do you understand? So he could have chose in that moment, like I did when I was 26, because your first failure is always the worst as a founder. He chose to persevere. I didn't. But if I chose to persevere, I was like, yeah, like I'm going through a tough time right now, right? I could have also built more businesses successfully rather than having like 14, startups, sold a couple, but then the rest failed. Like I could have had better numbers on that. You see what I mean? I
Yeah.
could have achieved my potential, but it's a choice. You have to make that choice, and your decisions are always your ultimate power.
So that sounds like it has so much equivalence to world-class athletes.
Hmm.
If you think about that athletic mindset, if you're going to be great, you're going to work hard and overcome a lot of nonsense before you achieve that greatness,
Hmm.
right? And um, I don't know that the business world sees things in that way, the way as you're describing them, right? It's a, I have seen so many people who are, and it's not that these things don't have value, where they're just focused on their business plan, they're focused on their marketing plans, they're focused on sales plans and whatever, but that those elements of that journey that are going to come up and are going to foul all that, because when they go to market, the market doesn't care about any of that shit.
Hmm.
It's going to say, okay, you had a nice idea and I don't give a crap. Now I'm going to I'm going to tell you what I think.
Yeah.
And that throws a monkey wrench in all your plans. And can you overcome that? Can you, or do you have the psychological capability to persevere?
Yeah. That's why I literally wrote the book, Your Inner Game. That was the first one. Because I was also, it was like, I think it was like my last business was scaling, doubling revenues every year, blah, blah. And the show was the biggest that it had ever been. And basically, I was like, you know what? And I started hearing these stories, like truly horrific things happening to people. And like, for instance, one guy, it was very an African story. I did like 100 episodes at the time. So most of my guests were in Africa
Sure,
bef-
please,
bef-
please
before I
share.
ran out of talent. And then I had to go look globally. But that's another story. But anyway, so I was hearing these stories. I mean, this one guy, Rusty Labuskachny, he got arrested for a murder he didn't commit in Zimbabwe.
Oh
And
my.
he was a very wealthy man. And they put him into a maximum security prison in Harare. Like, dude, like Manoj, that's the most horrific story. When I was reading the audio, doing the audiobook for that chapter, I was like welling up because it's like I can't actually believe that this guy survived this stuff. Like they would put them in the most horrific conditions, like horrific. And he was in, and like there was no hope for him. There was no, like, if you get arrested for murder in Zimbabwe as a white man, you're fucked,
You're
right?
done.
There's no way out. And that whole system is corrupt and this and that. And you just think about like what his mindset must have been. And they put him into like solitary confinement and all this stuff and blah, blah. But eventually, somehow, by some way, he was eventually acquitted, right? And now
Okay.
he's a speaker and he talks about his story and so forth. And so other stories, like there was this one girl, her father owned a small holding where they had wild animals on it.
Okay.
And so the girl, she was like youngster, she was like 13 or whatever. And so she's in her home, and a lion jumps through the window of the lounge, grabs her by the head, and pulls her out of the house, drags her down to, like they call it, a kraal, and literally standing over her, and like her face is cut like, just if 13 and a lion doesn't exactly go together.
Right.
Another kid was Pop. He was a very good rugby player, and he was because he was so good, the kids at school got jealous, and so they doused him with petrol and set him on fire, right? And then yeah,
That's
like hectic stuff. And like one guy, Joey Evans, he was a very good motocross rider, enduro rider, and his dream was always to do the Dakar. And then they call it the whole shot. So it's like the first corner. So as they all go off, it's called the whole shot, and you want to be first into the whole shot. But unfortunately, he crashed his bike, and the whole field of like 50 motorbikes rode over him, and so he broke his back, and he went to hospital, and the doctors were telling him like, dude, you're never going to walk again, like you're done, that's it. And he was the father of three daughters, and he was like lying there in his hospital bed, lost all hope. His dream of racing the Dakar is done, and he's like beating himself up. He's like, I'm never going to be able to walk my daughters down the aisle. Like he was done, right? Imagine like the trauma of that. And then one day he feels on his big toe on his left leg, he starts to feel like a tingling sensation. So he starts wiggling his toe. And like 6 months later, like the feeling comes back in his legs. The doctors are like, oh my God, this is a miracle. And then eventually he, like, long story short, like he had numerous accidents after that, blah, blah, blah. But eventually he raised money, entered the Dakar, and
wow.
he was the seventh South African to finish the Dakar in history. Do you see what I mean? So my point being is, why do these stories matter? Because when you think that your life sucks, when you think that you're going through something that's like really, really tough, right? And yes, it is tough. I'm not saying what you're feeling is wrong, but what I am saying is that there's always someone worse off than you. Right? And so if you can recognize that for a moment, you can give yourself a little bit of a break. You can start to, like, I'm also guilty of this. I'm a very achievement driven person. So if I don't feel like I'm making progress, like, I'll beat myself up. So stop doing that. Like, be kinder to yourself and recognize that we're all in this journey of suffering. And in fact, in life, I believe that all we actually have is suffering. Like, in 365 days a year, use 365 days of suffering. And maybe there's like 3 days a year where you feel truly elated. But otherwise, it's all suffering, right? And so this is the reality. And so if we can surrender and accept to this journey that we're all on, then we can be more comfortable with it. You know what I mean? We can find meaning and purpose in these things that we're trying to build for ourselves.
Assuming that one develops that consciousness to be able to do what you have just described, are there other people, are there other human superpowers that some of these incredibly successful people have had, like Elon Musk, or people of that cadre? That do they have something else besides that ability, that psychological strength and the temerity and persistence to
Mhm.
get
Yeah,
it
they're
done?
hungry. They don't, they don't, they don't see themselves as successful unless they're hungry. That's pretty much a big one for me. So,
What
like,
drives them to stay
what drives
hungry?
them? Contribution, actually. I mean, if you think about the greatest influences in history, Nelson Mandela from South Africa,
Yeah.
Elon, right? Oprah, as an example, and many, many others. But what do they all have in common? And this comes down to how you define influence. So if you ask 10 CEOs, like, what is influence, you get 10 different answers. And so if you can't define it, then how can you cultivate it and use it? So when so when I moved to the US, I kind of lost all my network, and I basically had the show, and I was like, shit, I need to do something. So I sent 1,000 emails, and this is a story that's setting up why what influence is and why it matters. Is that I sent 1,000 emails to these startup founders in California only who had raised $1 million or more in the preceding 12 months. And I sent a very simple emails like, hey, my name's Matt Brown. I'm the host of the Matt Brown Show. I've have had Steve Blank, Jeffrey Moore, all these super ding dong thought leaders in the startup space on the platform, and I'd
Yeah.
like to give you some free PR exposure. Here's the Calendly link. Goodbye.
Yeah.
So when I went to bed, I woke up the next morning and I was horrified about what I saw. There were 190 booked interviews. Couldn't believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, man, I couldn't believe it. I was like, shit, what have I
You
done?
scored
So
gold.
yeah, man. And so for the next 6 weeks, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. for 6 weeks, Monday to Friday, that's all I was doing, was interviewing these visionaries, which was amazing in and of itself. But I sat back and I asked myself, like, why did that work? Like, what was that? What do you call it? And then I was like, shit, you know what it is? It's actually influence. And so here's the thing with influence. Everyone's trying to commoditize you. Like no matter what you're trying to do, you want to sell cybersecurity? Oh, you're just another cybersecurity firm. And so the
Yeah,
same applies to influence, right? So people think, oh, influence is what? Influencer marketing. It's like, no, it's not. Influencer marketing is about self-enrichment. You're getting paid $10,000, $15,000 to promote a product you don't really use just because you have 1 million followers on Twitter. It's rubbish. It's about self-enrichment. But true influence is about elevating others. That's what Elon does. Like, what is SpaceX trying to do? Well, multiplanetary species. Why? Because he wants to elevate humanity. Same thing with Tesla, right? Blah, blah, blah. Nelson Mandela, he was in prison for like 32 years, dude. And so when he left prison in 1994, South Africa, he had a choice to enrich himself, which there was a
he had a lot
landslide
of
victory for him.
opportunities for that.
Dude, yeah, but he did not do that. He became one of the best statesmen in history, because he made the choice to elevate South Africa and its population, right, in a way that was positive. And so this is what influence really is. It's about elevating others. So that's why I say it's a superpower, and that's why I focus on influence now with business
And
leaders,
it's
is
a rare
because,
one because when you look at like a Nelson Mandela suffering, which you talked about,
yeah, yeah.
immense amount of suffering, and he could have self-enriched, and he could have been very vindictive,
Hmm.
right? I mean, towards the population in South Africa and just gone on a rampage. But that is, I mean, in many ways, you're looking past some natural instincts that arise inside of you, right? You're talking about elevating others. And we hear, I'll just pick on Donald Trump. I mean, he said it on public television that everybody looks out for their self-interest. Why wouldn't I too? I mean, and I forget what it was in context to, but you're talking about enriching others. So that's a different mindset altogether.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, I actually think it's why the Matt Brown show has been so successful, is because the why of the show hasn't changed. And I touched on that earlier. But it's a choice, right? If you believe that you have a superpower, and that superpower is your ability to influence people in a positive way, then things start to change for you, genuinely. Here's another story. So when Logan Paul launched Prime, in his drink Prime in Europe, they had organized this event, and basically they gave them all Prime bottles, the whole crowd there.
Okay.
And and he said, listen, on the count of three, what we want you to do is we want you to throw these bottles at us on the stage. But obviously make sure they're empty because we'll get hurt. But
Yeah.
on the count of three, throw all these bottles. So that's what they did. And when you saw the video, it looked like the launch of Prime went south. Like they said something wrong, and the crowd was reacting because they're all Coke fans or something, And so, so basically, then what happened was that the media in the US picked up on it, and then of course social media, and then it went viral. Okay, but the whole thing was staged. It was fake. It was fake. So that's why I'm saying it's an ethical thing. Do you, even though like he was using that influence, right, to sell more or to raise the profile of his brand Prime, do you think that that was ethically correct? If you're lying, do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so even like with the boxing stuff that Logan Paul does, like a lot of that stuff's staged. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's like a farce, but it's creating influence. And so this is why I'm saying influence is basically, from an ethics perspective, negative or positive. So like Nelson, positive, Elon, positive. I believe, however, that those who choose to use influence in a positive way, those are the ones that win over time.
That's that's insightful. Another superpower. Is there anything else? So having that ability to influence, helping others, suffering, enduring. Anything else that goes in the character traits?
For sure. They ask better questions. You know,
Explain that one,
yeah,
please.
well, okay, take SpaceX. Why wasn't that done by anyone else on planet? The 7 billion people here. Why was Elon the one to go? well, how can we become a multiplanetary species? You know what I'm saying? People weren't thinking that way. They weren't asking the right questions. And so I believe also that, questions govern our lives more than we think we know. I believe that when we have an experience, especially when it's a negative one, in the subconscious, we have all these questions that are sitting there. Like, am I good enough? You know, am I an imposter? Will someone discover that I'm a fraud? You know, I don't think it can be done. Well, I'm not the one to do it, right? And so when we have these negative experiences, they bubble up into the surface, and suddenly you're crying over your supper with your family sitting around you because you believe that you're a fraud or you're an imposter or you're not good enough, and so questions govern our lives more than anything else. It's the same thing with like networking events. You go to a networking event, and I went to one in Boulder here the other day, and like as an introvert, I hate networking. It's the worst possible thing for me, especially in a loud environment. So everyone's networking. It's like, oh, we're going to meet lots of people and exchange at least 10 business cards because those 10 business cards, like if I can get like one of those 10 business cards to become my clients, I would have made money, and then this networking event would have been a success. So everyone's speedily trying to network, right? And so what do they ask you? What's the one question that everybody asks you the most? Well, what do you do?
Ooh, yeah.
Right? And then you're like, yeah, I'm a super ding dong podcast host and I do this and that and blah, blah, blah. And so then it's like, cool. And then what do you do? Right? But what's a better question? Why do you do what you do? You know? So, like, if you think about question structure, why, what, when, how, right? And if you think about which of those types of questions, like what do you do, why do you do it, when do you do it, or how do you do it, which is the one that's more valuable? If you really wanted to understand someone, if you really wanted to understand someone's motivation, the question why do you do what you do, dude? Like, why do you get out of bed in the morning? Why do you do this podcast? Why do you do what you do as a cybersecurity professional? The more you ask why, the more, insight you get to something or to someone, into yourself. And the richer your insights, the richer what you do is. So, like, I was head of strategy for Ogilvy in another life. And as a strategist, when you've got a $10 million go to market motion, you want to be damn sure that what you go to market with is going to resonate. And so what these big agencies do is they work with an insight as a strategist, like a key insight. It's the thing you base everything on. It's like the one thing that your messaging is based on, your creative's based on, your segmentation's based on. Everything is based on this one insight. So how do you get to an insight? So if you imagine a layer of an onion, it's got all these layers. So you say, so why do you do the Matt Brown show? Well, I do the Matt Brown show to make a positive difference to business leaders. Okay, but why do you want to make a positive difference to business leaders? Well, I want to make a positive difference to business leaders because I believe everybody needs help. Okay, but why do you believe that everybody needs help? So the more you ask why, the deeper you start to go. And so eventually you wind up in a purpose space. It's weird. So like my thing is I achieve things to inspire others to reach for their own dreams. That's why I do what I do. You see, but if you don't keep asking why, you kind of play in the superficial level of the onion, and you don't really get to something of real substance. You see, and so this is why I say questions is another superpower. Hence, Elon Musk, and so on and so forth. These are the guys that don't ask like, can it be done? They go, well, how can it be done?
Well, I'll tell you, the average layperson will say, "Why do I care? I'm
Yeah,
and they'll ne's want to dig in that way. They're just like, I don't care.
yeah.
I want to exchange a business card with them."
This is business cards are such a dated thing, man. It's such a dated thing. They really are. Actually, just on the business card thing, I actually think that the best business card you can ever have is a best-selling book.
I got to ask you also one other thing is of all, in your experience with the hundreds of guests that you've had, has there anybody that's correlated success in life with success in education?
Great question. Um, no, not formal education. So I was on a podcast yesterday, and I was chatting to the host, Addison, and she's a director of like a global company and so on and so forth. and it's like an association. So everyone in that association is like PhD, MBA,
Yeah.
doctorate thing, this and that, super ding dong. And she doesn't have a single degree, nothing. So I said to her, how is it then that you're at the top and all these super educated people are not? Why is that the case? And so I said, she paused and I said, can I tell you what I think it is? I think it's called the QBE.
What
She
is
says,
that?
what's the QBE? So I'm like, no, that means qualified by experience. Because experience, right, real world experience is way more valuable than what you learned in a textbook at Harvard, genuinely. So, as an example, like, what's the point in going to do an MBA today? Like, I don't understand. So, if you want
Oh, I
to,
love that.
like why? Like, why the fuck do you want to have an MBA? Like, I don't understand. Like, if you want to be a brain surgeon, fine. If you want to be an engineer, like a hardcore, like rocket engineer, fine. Education's fantastic. But if you're like an aspiring entrepreneur or CEO or business leader, like education, like classical education is so defunct. It's like it hasn't been updated to reflect the world as it is today. So basically what I'm saying is if you like as an MBA, by the time you finish your MBA, you've now got, $200,000 worth of student debt. Well done. And now you're going to apply for the same jobs with tens of thousands of other kids with the exact same degree as you. So what makes you different? Why do you think that you're going to win?
Well, because you
Or
went to
you,
Harvard. So
yeah, yeah, Harvard. That's a whole other conversation. After this last stink of theirs with the dean and that. But QBE is more important. Like I remember I was in my first year in college. I was 6 months in, and I got a call on the intercom like, Matthew Brown, please come to the admin's office. So I go there, and she says to me, listen, you need to pay 50,000 Rand. Otherwise, you have to get out of college. And I'm like, what are you talking about? My dad's paying for that. So she's like, no, he hasn't actually paid for anything. So I'm like, shit. Well, I don't have 50,000 Rand. I was like 18, 19 years old. What am I going to do? So I made that decision in that day. I was a waiter in that day. I was like, you know what? If this is a situation, I have to take responsibility for myself. I'm not going to blame my dad, and I'm going to choose to become an entrepreneur. And that's exactly what I did. And I saved up enough cash waitering to go to London. That's when I started the record
wow.
label. And everything I've learned has been through experience. That's it. So no degree, no nothing. And if you look at like Richard Branson, no degree. So many super wealthy and successful people had zero education, like none, like basically nothing. And they learned everything on the job, like real world experience. They had a vision, they had a dream for the future, and they were like, I'm going to go solve that thing for the world.
So then one, you look at today's world, or you watch Netflix, and there's a lot of stuff out there on the law of attraction.
Mm.
Is that a thing, or are they what they're really talking about? Is it's not a woo power? It's not like you're actually it's your way of thinking that's actually manifesting that reality. It's
Yeah.
not like you have. They make it seem like this mystical thing. You
Mm.
have the law of attraction, but is the
Mm.
law of attraction really all the things that you're talking about? That if you do those, the outcome's gonna happen naturally, regardless.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think, we all have these weird moments, don't we? It's like, oh, that's so weird that thing happened. Like, a great one is, hey, man, I'm thinking about Minaj, and then Minaj gives me a call. I say, oh, I was just thinking about you. That's so weird. It must be manifest. It must be the universe and the
Yeah,
law of attraction, right? And so, look, I'm not a specialist in that space. You can talk to a quantum physicist that says all atoms are intertwined, can be in two places at the same time, only
sure.
they are the place of observing an atom is what brings it into reality. Like, fuck, I don't know. But here's what I know to be true is that when it comes to manifesting anything, like let's take luck, for instance. Where does luck come from? Oh, you just met that guy at that networking event. Best luck ever, because that business card number 3, that guy became a client.
And he didn't ask you why.
you know?
So
But why did you get the business card in the first place? Because you went there. So you made your own luck. Do you see what I mean? You put
yeah,
yourself in that
that's
situation where you could meet that guy or that girl, and business card number 3 became a client. So you make your own luck. Bill Gross is probably like one of the most successful entrepreneurs ever. Like he's built and sold like several billion-dollar companies, like unicorns. and then he's invested, and he's had a lot of failure also. But he did this talk about why do you start some startups become so uber successful and others die, right? Like, why is that? And so he looked at like all the things usual investors might look at, right? So like, was it the team? Was it the right business model? Did they have the right product? Blah blah blah. And he looked at all these things and he said, you know what? When I look at, and he went all the way back to the dot-com boom, right? And what he found was that the number one reason why a business is successful is because of timing. If you're too early, you don't scale. If you're too late, too many competitors. You see what I'm saying? So market timing is, if that is true, and he's probably best qualified than anyone else to say that it is because of his success, right? But if it's about timing, then why are there so many founders on the sidelines going, well, when is the right time to start a business? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's never a right time. There's only today. So
that's
going back
right.
to the luck thing, you have to put yourself in that situation. You have to choose to take a risk, right? And you have to choose to suffer. You have to stay there. And when you're suffering, you have to learn to sit in your purpose and say to yourself, today is a shite day, but tomorrow is another day, and I get to continue on this journey. You see? So I think that's what it's about. It's just about like putting yourself in situations and executing and choosing to stay on the train, no matter how fast and scary it looks at times. And then, hey, if you manifest an acquirer
Yeah.
to come pay you $1 billion for your business, whoop-de-doo, you can blame the universe for that. But if you don't actually do the work, like the universe isn't going to build your business for you. Do you see what I mean?
I that there was a reason why I asked that question, and you said it there right there in the end. And I wanted our audience to hear it and get that. So, is there, before we run out of time, I want to make sure the audience gets to hear, are there any practical methods by which they can inculcate these traits inside of them to want to move those pebbles so they eventually move the mountain? Is there some practical things that can be done for the average Joe who doesn't think this way?
Well, maybe that's where you start. Is to start thinking differently about what you're doing. You know, I do believe your thoughts create reality. Like, I do believe that, thoughts, feelings, actions, results. But maybe that's where you do start. Like, think differently about what it is that you're doing. I mean, as an example, going back to the AI thing, like book publishing is one thing, but there's a whole like there's so much opportunity actually today. Like, no matter what actions you want to take, first thing is start thinking differently about the universe, your own universe that you hail from every single day. So like, let's take B2B, right? So you have a B2B business, so do I. So what do you see on LinkedIn typically? So people are either like marketing the problem, hey, ransomware, da da da, and then, or the solution. Well, we've got this fancy super ding dong, a cybersecurity product that can assess your data and give you a full view of your data lake and blah blah. But what they forget to do is actually start thinking about, going back to the question things. Well, what is my real value? What's my actual value? So if you take the Macron show, for instance, so if I was to market a problem, I'd go to a CEO and I'd say, hey, you want to get your story out into a global market of business leaders, right? Yes, problem. Okay, solution. What I'll do is I'll interview you for 60 minutes and you can promote the hell out of your business. You can promote whatever you want, but you know what? It's going to cost you $1,000. Okay, so that's like the problem and solution. But what's my actual value? If you think about it, is it the fact that I have a media? Yeah, not really. But my real value is in the 850 interviews that I've done with these super successful guys, the failure stories, the thousands of stories and data points and tips and growth hacks and perspective, right? That's really what the value is. So if you think about what my audience is, like business leaders trying to build things that matter to the world, right? We all get stuck. We all on our journey of suffering. And so we all need help along the way. So what we've done now, going back to start thinking differently about the world and that you inherit, right? So with AI, what we've now done is we've taken all of the transcripts, all my books, all the thought leadership videos, pretty much everything I've ever done, and we've loaded it up into a custom GPT app called Mac Brown AI. So
Okay.
now, instead of having to, who's got time to listen to 850 interviews? I don't. So, but you want access to the knowledge capital, which, by the way, is not even part of the existing main GPT platform. Why? Because it's my content, it's my knowledge, it's my body of work. So you can't find that shit on GPT. You can't find it, right? But the value of that, think about what that value would be. Imagine if it was positioned like this. Imagine you could get access to the minds of 850 super successful business leaders in a
It's
fraction of a second.
invaluable.
Yeah, it's invaluable. So that's why I'm saying. But if you so now, and you can actually get this on my website. You sign up, join the community. It's like 100,000 people there, and you can literally talk to Matt Brown AI. Right? Pretty fucking cool. But none of that would be possible if you didn't, or if I didn't start thinking differently, right, about the world as it is today. And I think we get so caught up in our own, like, narrative and, whatever that stuff is, like, we're not good enough. It's not the right time. It's not a business, whatever it is, that we don't actually start to ask the right question. Well, what could self-publishing look like with AI? That's a good one, or how could it be done faster, much, much faster? And, or how could I influence a million entrepreneurs without being there? I mean, one of the other things that we're doing is we're putting language translation in there. So now I can access the Chinese market. No Chinese consumer is listening to Matt Brown speak English, right? Or a Spanish market who just don't speak English. So that, if I lived in Spain one time, and if you don't speak Spanish, they won't speak to you. So now my team actually sent me a digital avatar, which, by the way, was created with what? AI, where I'm literally speaking Spanish. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy, dude. So now I can scale my influence massively. Not so much also my influence, but the value. Do you see what I'm saying? But it all starts with, well, let's change my thinking about who I am, what I'm capable of doing, and the impact and the influence that I can have in the world.
Very well said. That was right there worth the price of admission, which was free. So I mean but that's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. Well, Matt, is there anything else you would like to plug? I know we're at the hour here. I was going to ask you, and you did a fantastic job, and I hope our audience would encourage them to go to your website and sign up for your community.
Yeah, man.
Anything else you want them to know about?
Probably just a quote. I love quotes. So Plato, this one's from Plato, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, any man that doesn't learn to cultivate his own influence will eventually be ruled by lesser men. And I always thought that that was a powerful premise, for not only what I do, but for what everybody has the potential to do for themselves. So that's what I'd like to challenge people on is do something, like start thinking, like I don't matter, I don't care what it is for you, but do something different, so that you can start to cultivate your influence. Because if we can build the next generation of influential business leaders, not influencers, influential business leaders,
Yeah.
think about how better off the world would be. Think about that.
Oh, it could change in really remarkable ways because it might inspire people who today don't believe that they are capable of doing anything to actually reach a potential that they never thought. And who knows what gifts they have to offer all of us. We don't know.
Mm-hmm. You just don't know, man. And we all have something to valuable to share, man. It's a crazy thing. Like, we're
I,
all doing amazing things, cybersecurity professionals, whatever.
yeah.
And if we can just learn to, like, share that stuff and get over ourselves, like the fear of judgments or whatever, then we'll all be better off.
You know, Matt, you've been fantastic. Thank you for your wisdom and your insight. It's been wonderful. We're gonna I can't wait to see some of the comments on this, and then we'll have to find a break in your schedule and find a way to get you back. But
Yeah, anytime, man, anytime.
this
Yeah,
has been
anytime.
very insightful, and I
Thank
know
you.
our audience is going to love it because inherently in the world of cybersecurity, you have to think differently if you're going to outpace the bad guys, or even make an attempt of keeping up with them. Um, so,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's a wild bunch. So this fits directly square with this whole group, and we appreciate you doing this.
We appreciate you too, Manoj. Thanks for having me on, man.
Thank you.